Welcome to the Covered Podcast. I am your host, Mya-Karren, and on this show we discuss women and how we are showing up in the world. Today's guest is Dr. Jennifer Herring. Dr. Herring currently is the Executive Director of the Worcester Education Collaborative, where she works collaboratively with community partners in creating high-quality, safe, and supportive learning opportunities for all students in the city of Worcester. Dr. Herring has held school-based leadership and central office roles in curriculum and instruction, as well as student services. Dr. Herring has written her first book. It is titled Sexual Trauma Among Girls in Educational Settings, and it is available where all books are sold. Please welcome Dr. Herring.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Of course. Thank you for being here. So as you know, because you did reach out to me because you saw my conversation with Dr. Fagans, I want to have a conversation with you. You have a different perspective. You live elsewhere. You are currently in New England, Massachusetts, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So I just wanted to have a conversation with you about literacy. But before I read some statistics, in your own words, can you just kind of explain what literacy is?
So literacy is the ability to sound out phonics correctly the first time, as well as read fluently, which most would say in about 60 seconds or so, to have more than 85% accuracy in your reading. Additionally, it would be about comprehension. So do you understand what you read as well? So it's the combination of all three, as well as being able to have academic discourse about the material that you're reading.
Okay, so your definition of literacy includes comprehension, because sometimes when I talk to people, they feel as though there is a difference between literacy and comprehension, meaning you might be able to read, but you might not be able to understand what you have read. But your definition encompasses all of that.
Correct, yes.
All right. And then before we have this conversation, I do want to read some statistics. So the very first one, it says, according to the research by the Annie E. Casey Foundation and National and State Reading Assessment data, 2/3 of U.S. fourth graders are not proficient readers. It also states research by the Children's Literacy Foundation indicates that 61% of low-income families have no age-appropriate books in the household. And then specific to you, in Worcester public schools, only 1 in 4 third graders met proficiency standards on the 2024 English Language Arts MCAS assessment. And then specific to you, 74% of students are from low-income families. The need for extra help when reading and other literacy skills is particularly needed. Now, when I was talking to Dr. Fagans, I was talking about it on a wide scale. But when we are talking about Massachusetts, do you think the citizens of Massachusetts are aware that the literacy issue is this bad?
So, so that's a really good question. So I think it depends who you ask. Right now, I believe statewide, we're looking at about 40% proficiency. Worcester specifically is at about 24% proficiency in ELA since the last MCAS scores were released. And so, as you shared in the beginning, my role is to convene multiple community partners in the city of Worcester and across the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And so what I found is that I think that folks that are the closest to the work of education are more aware of what I like to call the urgency of our current literacy rates, whereas folks who are maybe not as involved in education but are closer to fields kind of education adjacent, for lack of a better word, health and human services, maybe nonprofit sectors that are more focused on supporting families in getting the basic needs that they need, they're maybe less removed from those rates. And so, as I said, it depends who you talk to. But my role in particular as the executive director at Worcester Education Collaborative is to make sure that we're constantly making a push in our community and letting folks know locally what are the priorities, not just with literacy rates, but just overall education policy. What are the things we should be advocating for, and how do we help educate the community on what are the budding issues and challenges in education, and how do we support students in getting what they need.
Okay. So let's say you go out on the street with a microphone and ask just 100 people. They may not be in proximity or they might not be adjacent. Let's say you just ask 100 normal people, because sometimes when we live in echo chambers, we don't see maybe what we have not experienced or what we are not aware of.
Sure.
How many out of those 100 people, when you would give them a statistic like I gave you, how many of those people do you think would be very surprised about that?
I would say maybe about 85% of them would be shocked.
Wow.
I
Okay.
think the perception in education, again, when folks are not as close to the work, is that schools are teaching students and students are learning. And while that's the intention and that's the goal, um, most people don't understand the barriers and the challenges to teaching and learning in schools today. I mean, teachers, we have to remember, are taught or trained in their specific content area.
Yes.
When an aspiring teacher goes to college, they want to learn how to teach math, for example. And they could start their teaching career in a community where the needs are so high to the point where they can sometimes hinder a student's ability to access their learning. And so, what we're seeing in schools now is that teachers are really looking for support to help students with the out of school time challenges that they're experiencing so that they can better engage in the classroom. And this, of course, was a challenge before the pandemic, but of course became more kind of compounding after COVID. So that's where we are today.
That's actually the perfect segue because you have held multiple roles. So let's start with teaching. When did you
Yes.
start teaching and what did you teach?
Oh gosh, I've taught everything. So I've been teaching. Man, it's been about 12 years now since
Wow.
I
Okay.
entered the classroom. But I've taught special education. I've taught Spanish. I've taught English, theater. Then I became a vice principal at an elementary school in a district not too far from Worcester. And then I was able to shift when I completed my doctoral studies. I shifted into a role in central office. And then really just working with student services and curriculum work at that level. And then shortly after came here to Worcester to work for this organization. So it's been a little over a decade.
Wow. Okay. So I'm pretty sure you have seen the changes. So starting
Yes.
with English, and you have a little bit of a different perspective because you also taught theater and you are fluent in a few languages, aren't you?
Yes. Uh,
Spanish, English, I think Creole. What list them
English,
for a
Haitian
sec.
Creole, French, American Sign Language, and Spanish.
Okay, wonderful. So
Thank
starting
you.
with English,
Yes.
before you reached out to me and before I even heard of Dr. Fagans, I would hear teachers talk about behavior when it comes to reading and or when a child does not understand something.
Yes.
You were an English teacher and let's say you gave an assignment. If a child did not understand the assignment, or let's say you gave them a prompt and maybe they could not read the prompt or they couldn't comprehend the prompt,
Yep.
would you notice that's when the behavioral issues or the interruptions would begin?
Well, this is a really good question because I get this a lot. So, yes, and it depends on the student.
Okay.
So, a lot of times I think there's a misconception about um, how a student acts when they don't understand an assignment or they're uncomfortable with what they're being asked to do. Just a very brief history about what brought me into education. So, I myself am a survivor of childhood sexual assault. And so, my family came here from Haiti shortly before I was born. And I've spent most of my life between Providence, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts. And so that being said, culturally, my family was very strict. My
Yes.
mom raised us
I have a Jamaican
very.
mother.
Where's your family from?
I have a Jamaican mother.
Okay, so you understand. So very strict, loving and very strict and had high expectations.
Yes.
And so when I was growing up in school, I noticed that kids who really struggled and misbehaved, they got a lot of attention from the teachers, right? And so they were the kids who got the support and they were the kids who got the attention. Whereas for me, even though I was struggling kind of academically, you would never know it because I was so quiet, right? Because I was more so like following the cultural expectations of my
Reserved.
household.
You were
And so
reserved.
because I was so quiet, people just assumed I understood. And they were like, oh, Jen, she's so smart. She gets it, which, I am smart. At the same time, I did a lot of heavy lifting on my own behind the scenes because people just assumed that because I was not misbehaving that I understood it. And so for me as an educator, I always try to look at not just students who are giving unexpected behaviors, but students that are quiet, students that are shy, students that maybe are not giving that academic discourse that I talked about in the beginning. Teaching is an art. It's not just about reaching those like highly obvious behaviors. It's about like surveying the whole classroom and knowing each student individually and being able to see, I know when the student is on, I know when the student is off, and being able to, in the moment, make the changes that students need. And as I shared earlier, it is challenging to do that when all of these out of school time factors kind of hinder one individual teacher to be able to reach every student where they are.
Okay. And that actually makes a lot more sense because, like you shared, even though you were struggling, you were very reserved. And if the
Yes.
teacher is solely looking for misbehavior, she might or he might miss someone like you, a student that's struggling like you, that's very quiet.
Yes. Yes. So, and I think just in general in practice as an educator, I've learned that in addition to the behaviors that you might see, students in particular, for example, who are learning English as a second or third language, it's important to note that they can sometimes go through a silent period because their brain is trying to absorb multiple languages at once. They're speaking maybe one or two languages at home, or in the case of students that have come in through immigration or as refugees, they've picked up languages on their way to the US school system. So they're being bombarded with English while trying to process in multiple languages that they already know. And so sometimes as educators, we can make the mistake of making assumptions about um, what a student might need um, as far as maybe an IEP or maybe defiance, or maybe a student could be assumed to be struggling with being on the spectrum, when really they're just trying to process language, and eventually that language is going to come out years later. But because we're focused on the now, we're not understanding how the student is processing. So I wanted to make sure that we brought that point out because there are many out of school time factors and academic intellectual things that are going on in a student's brain that we can sometimes miss as teachers.
I have a question. I don't know if you can answer it, but I have heard people say when English is not your first language or when you are trying to learn English, it is actually one of the most difficult languages to learn. Is that true?
Yes, because it
Okay.
doesn't follow the same patterns as like Spanish or French. English is the language of exceptions. So when you're learned used to, speaking a language that follows rules and has minimal exceptions, English is the exact opposite in every way.
Okay. I want to tack on theater because that requires a lot of reading. And so you were teaching theater pre-COVID and post-COVID?
The year that COVID happened was the year that I taught theater.
Okay, the year that it happened. Because and we'll get into the whole e-learning and the tablets. Did you find that there were a growing number, whether it was English or it was theater, did you find there were a growing number of students who were struggling to read? Like you would hand them a script and they deer in headlights. Was this something that was happening like progressively?
So I was at that time working in a city that was mostly Hispanic immigrants, Latino immigrants. And so what I ended up having to do, and it was elementary school. So for the most part, you would think my population of students would be able to read at grade level. That was not the case, unfortunately. So I ended up doing a lot of repeated lessons, a lot of off scripts, kind of improv work, just trying to get language in students' brains and in their discourse. Because one thing that I think that is not always said in education is that all teachers are literacy teachers. And
Hmm.
so if your students are not able to access text at grade level, it becomes every teacher's challenge, right? And
I
so
could
how
see
do
that,
we
yes.
as teachers make sure that we're embedding literacy practice um, and things that will set students up for success in their future, regardless of what content we teach, right? You mentioned a script. If students can't read a script, how can we produce a show? And so, like, What would that, are we only focusing on the few students that are reading at grade level? Is that fair to the whole class? And so it really is, that is something in the very beginning years of my time as an educator, is that it was drilled into us that all teachers in this building are literacy teachers. And if we, as long as we continue to function under that mantra, our students will get further faster.
It's interesting you say that, and let me know what you think about this. I don't know if you are, in the YouTube streets or if you're on Instagram or TikTok.
The streets
But
sometimes.
okay. So there are a whole bunch of teachers, whether they're on TikTok, Instagram, they're upset and they're ready to quit. I want to ask you this question because I find what you said very interesting. There are teachers in the streets of YouTube who are very adamant that they are not a literacy teacher. They are not literate. When they come, because a lot of people are saying, I believe it's if you miss them between like third and fourth grade, them learning to read is going to become even harder.
Less likely,
There are
right.
teachers, there are teachers out there who say your child needs to come to kindergarten learning how to read. I'm a fourth grade teacher. I don't have time to teach. And I know that there are other factors,
Correct.
but they are adamant that when your child comes in, I have to teach them math. If they can't read the math problem, that's the parents' issue. And it's interesting that you say that that's how you were taught. But now I'm hearing teachers here in 2024, 2025, 2026 saying, listen, I'm a math teacher. I don't have time to sit and help your child read about Bob and his three apples. Where do you think that's coming from?
Honestly, I think that's coming from the volume of students that are coming in, not reading at grade
Okay.
level. I think
Okay.
if that perspective were maybe 10 years ago, I think that would be hard to take, right?
Yes.
As an educator. But I think now we've seen such a decline in our data and our metrics around literacy in our schools. I don't necessarily, I wonder, I don't know all the teachers that are saying this, but I wonder if those teachers are coming from a place of the volume of students that I have to help catch up before I can then go into my content is overwhelming. And I think that, that's true if you think about just where we are, just where our schools are I mean, our student body does not reflect the same students that we were teaching, like when I first started teaching. It's just not.
Correct.
Um,
Correct.
and I think the urgency that I talk about really speaks to, you know, if our high schoolers, for example, or middle schoolers are not reading at grade level, what does our future workforce look like?
Right.
And I think that's part of my role here at WEC, is to really help out even our business partners in the community to really think about, this has to be an all hands on deck concern so that we can really start to think about, how do we address this literacy challenge? Because it's not just a Worcester problem. It's not just a Massachusetts problem. Across the country, we are seeing a decline in our literacy rates. And so how do we think strategically in making sure we implement supports in schools and partner with families? I think it's both our responsibilities. As a mom, I do think it's my responsibility to make sure that my kids are ready for school, and I think it's my responsibility to partner with their educators to make sure that we are all on the same page and giving our kids the same messaging. So I think it's both and.
Okay. All right. And we talked about it briefly, but let's go ahead and get into it. Tablets, ed tech,
Oh,
AI. Um, I
yeah.
have heard stories of on the first day of school, kindergartners are being issued tablets. They're being issued Chromebooks. In your opinion, and I'm pretty sure have you had conversations about this as well? In your opinion, when it comes to the ed tech, when it comes to the AI, when it comes to the tablets, when it comes to the Google Chrome, I have heard the research, I've heard other people say that there really is no more benefit and or it can be detrimental to the cognitive development of a child. You've been in the classroom, you have seen the decline. Do you think there is a benefit? Maybe not the way that we're using it. Do we need to pull back? Do we need to couple it with something? What
Sure.
what what do you think?
I think that everything has to be done in balanced, right?
Yes.
So I'll give you an adult story and then I'll
Okay.
go down to the child level.
Okay.
In my, I won't say where I was at the time, but in my professional career, um, I have heard my colleagues tell one another, not in Worcester, that AI is your best friend. And I know that's like an unspoken thing right now that we're using AI for pretty much everything. And when it's used for things like, I'll give an example, like IEP writing or talking about, challenges that a student is having, an individual student is having with their academics and either remediation or supports. That's when it gets kind of sticky because at that point you're leaning completely on the technology. And of course, things get missed. And so the human side, the experience side, you're missing that. So that technology, it's not necessarily built to give an individualized focus on what the remedy or the solution is. It's built to take hard data, absorb whatever data it has access to, and give you the best fit that it can come up with based on whatever it's been given, right? So, that being said, I think that AI can be used to help support an IEP that's already written, that's already incorporating qualitative and quantitative data, where the student's strengths are, what the student's challenges are, and what their trajectory will be once, given the proper supports. I could see it being used in that sense. But if you're saying you're using blank slate and you're saying, create me an IEP for a kid who can't read at grade level and struggles with math, you're going to get all sorts of data, right? And so that being said, if adults, as adults, if we're getting too comfortable to lean on that, technology to get our work done, and we have fully developed brains, I can only imagine what's happening to our kids who are being given too much tech too soon, too frequently, with brains that are still developing. Our current kindergartners were born during the COVID pandemic, right? So
Yes.
we still don't even know how much different their brains are compared to a child that was born either before or after COVID hit. So all that to say, schools and education and teachers, we do this work for a reason because we're in love with, or we should be in love with, how a student learns best and how we can best foster their brains and how their brains are built down to the neuroscience of it to help them be the best future self that they can be. Right? That's why I do the work. But when we start kind of overly leaning on the technology, we take away the opportunity to really get down into the root of how to best support students. I also recognize that desperate times call for desperate measures. And so that could be part of why people are leaning on it so heavily. But to answer your question, as far as the student use of technology, I think it really needs to be balanced. And I think we need to be mindful, especially since currently the data is showing us that we're not necessarily producing literate children to the level that they should be literate currently.
Right. And that's kind of like, I know there's this huge debate right now. We're talking about AI, we're talking about ed tech and all of the games, where a lot of, and I believe it was in Mississippi, they went back to phonics. Now,
Yes.
every time you learn, and even as adults, when you're reading something, when you're watching something, it's educational, it's entertainment. I feel like we're kind of blurring these lines that every single time a child is learning something, it has to be fun, it has to be interactive, it has to have words and they have to be able to swipe and do all of these
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
Once you have set that expectation for a child and then you sit them in front of pen and paper, it doesn't seem like they're going to be as willing to learn whatever it is you're trying to get them to understand or learn. So, like you said,
Yes.
I think there needs to be a balance. Um, what do you think about that?
Absolutely. I think what that makes me think of is my really my own experience and how as a teacher my role has shifted, right?
Yes.
Where when I started out, um teaching was like it was like, okay, how do I package what I want my students to learn? How do I bring it to them? How do I say, like, it was almost
My
like,
delivery. Yep. How are
you
you going to
know,
deliver it?
yeah, like that was the whole thing, was like, how do I deliver in a way that is engaging and makes them want to learn? Fast forward, it slowly but surely shifted into deliver this curriculum. And so, great, I get materials to help me deliver the standards that my students need to learn. But then it went from deliver the curriculum to deliver the curriculum this way. And so then it became more and more rigid. So it kind of, as a teacher, I felt a little restrained from being able to deliver the content in a way that I knew my students could understand it, especially given that I had a huge English language learner population. So I had to, either way, I couldn't completely lean on the curriculum because I still had to make my own changes. And as far as what students need to be entertained, for lack of a better word, I noticed that when I taught middle school, I was competing with phone. That was that
Oh,
year that I taught
yes.
that middle school
Oh,
class.
yes.
Phones were like, I mean, I couldn't walk over and snatch all the phones. So what was I going to do? So you literally had to like turn yourself into a pretzel to keep them focused on you. And this was, I would say, like a couple of years before COVID. So now it depends on the district mandate for the one-to-one use of tablets. It's challenging. It's challenging because even adults, I wish I wrote down the name of this individual, but I think she was doing a TED Talk or a similar presentation to a room full of educators. And it might have been school committee meeting. Anyway, she was trying to make the case for supporting teachers with regulating the use of technology in classrooms. And so she says, can you all please put your laptops down at a 45-degree angle? No one did it. And it was a genuine, like, she was like, no, I want to give and she's like, okay, so we all here are adults, and I have made a request that you all please put your laptops down so that I can present this. And you all are telling me that I'm going to be able to engage a group of children on laptops and have them listen to what I'm saying, follow my expectations, and make mastery on the standards I'm trying to teach. You all are grown-ups and none of you all are willing to adhere to what I'm asking for. So how do you expect teachers to do their jobs if you give kids tablets who are way less likely to, you know, not comply?
And more entertaining. I mean, if we're just honest, is it Miss Rachel and Coco Melon and the colors and every three
Yeah.
seconds? And have speaking of that, have you noticed the attention span? Has that gotten worse?
For adults or kids?
Both, but let's stick to the kids. Let's
Okay,
stick to the
okay.
kids.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say yes. And something that I've noticed too is the multi-step directions. And maybe that's just, I
Mm.
don't know, maybe it's me.
They can't follow through. They
No,
get distracted.
they need a half a direction at a time for like multi-step. Like, let's say you wanted three directions, right? Push a chair in, go line up, walk to across the hall in your next class. It's like, no, push a chair in. All right, all the chairs are pushed in. All right, everybody. Okay, line up. Everyone lined up. That half the class will forget you said lined up, and they'll forget that you said to line up. It's like a constant. You have to constantly micromanage every bit of direction you're giving because I don't know. I think it's the technology. People can't even myself as an adult. I struggle. I'm like, wait, what was I supposed to do? It's yeah, it's different.
It's interesting you say that, and I wish that I could remember his name, but he talked about it, but he kind of expanded on it a little more. And you just heard me refer to Miss Rachel and Coco Melon.
Yes.
Apparently, Coco Melon is like toxic or like terrible for babies. But basically, what he was saying is like we're talking about children, but even for adults, he says that if you look at content that's being produced now, especially for children, not only is there are so many colors, but if you look, the angles and what you're looking at changes every 3 seconds. So like, let's say, and I don't know the characters for Coco Melon, but let's say you have a
Right.
girl and a boy. The girl's talking, then in 3 seconds they'll show the boy, and then vice versa.
Yes.
it's over simulating, and it's never just more than 3 seconds. And he was just saying, he was on Instagram one day, or TikTok, and there was this video that he was watching, and it was going every 3 seconds. He said that he had to put it down, and he got a headache. So like you said, all of these things that we are exposing our children to, I
Yes.
can't even imagine. And then on top of that, they are trying to learn, and then the teacher is trying to teach. So I know the attention span is out the window.
It's hard. And I had students who had, ADD, ADHD before technology was big in the classroom. I can only imagine now. I can only imagine. I mean, I even as, you know, I'm thinking about my nieces and nephews. They're like maybe toddler, ranging from toddler all the way up to my daughter, who's the oldest out of all of them. She's 10. And I always love to, watch them interact. My biggest thing with my kids and, kids in our family is like outside, go outside, go play.
Yes.
Because I grew up in an
Yes.
era where I was outside all day long, getting screamed at. My uncle, stay in or stay out, stop coming, that's how we grew up. And it was fun. That was our entertainment. Now it's like, you kind of got to remind kids it's nice out. You'd rather be out, right? Yeah, give me the tablet. Like, let's go outside and play, even down to like eye contact. It's
Yes.
amazing to me, students who
Yes.
struggle with like basic eye contact, right? And that's why I said earlier, we have to be careful about diagnosing, making assumptions about kids, because some things might not be a formal diagnosis. Some things might just be needing more intention around interpersonal contact and socialization. I don't know if you've seen on social media, what do they call it? The Gen Z stare.
I haven't I haven't heard of the Gen Z stare, but I have heard of the iPad kids.
Yeah, it's basically the same thing where it's
Okay.
like Gen Z, I guess there's like it's like this rhetoric now online where instead of saying, "Can you clarify that? Can you, like, restate the question?" You just get a stare, and that's, like, your way of knowing they didn't get what you said. Repeat it or rephrase it so they get it, and I'm just like, "A stare? That's what we're doing
That's
now?" Like,
that's not creepy at all. So-
but it's a thing. It's a thing. Like, we're now being kind of, I think social media and where we are as a society, we're being what's the word I'm looking for? We're being socialized to learn how to navigate folks that are not socialized the way that and it's like, well, how about we minimize tech, right? It's like, let's help you navigate how to interact with folks who have too much access to tech too early, too soon.
okay, so rather than verbalize they don't understand, they just stare at you. Okay.
I've
I'll
experienced
I'll
that
be
too.
okay. I'll be on the lookout for that.
Yep.
All right, Dr. Herring. Let's
You're gonna see it now in your algorithms. Your phone's gonna start showing it to you more and more now that we're talking about it.
right, it's gonna pop up when I hop on Instagram.
Yeah,
All
yeah.
right. All right, Dr. Herring, let's move to administration and curriculum design. If you could just a couple of bullet points, tell me what gaps you noticed when you entered into the school system when it came to the leadership.
Oh, okay. What gaps as far as curriculum?
Yes.
I would say something that is kind of universal from the curriculum that I have seen, is not as much attention to how to teach students who are learning English as a second or third language.
Okay.
And, that makes sense because obviously we're talking about US schools and English is the dominant language in our school system. But I've noticed that there's an assumption that the students that are going to be the teachers that are going to be utilizing the curriculum are teaching students that are reading at grade level and mastering content in their standards across the board that are reading and engaging with content at grade level. And so it's this challenging spot where we're seeing curriculum and I'm asking myself, should the fifth grade curriculum now reflect grade 2.5, or in the sense that our current fifth graders are performing at second grade? Let's just say, for example, should fifth grade now look like second grade? But then what does that look like? What does that mean for second grade curriculum, right? So it's this like constant toggling back and forth of we want students to reach mastery at grade level, but what do we need to do to get them there if the majority is actually not on grade level?
Okay. Playing keep up, essentially.
Pretty
Playing keep
much.
up,
Yeah.
but having to keep going, having to keep learning. Because then
Yes.
you also have to talk about, testing, right? Being proficient in testing. I believe
Yes.
was it the MCAS that I just talked
Yes.
about?
Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay. As far as bilingual students, homeless students, or low income students, I'm going to not assume, but the
Yeah.
literacy rate drops drastically. Is that correct?
I think it depends where what city you're talking about.
Okay.
From what I've seen, it's consistent across the board because that's the majority of the population. So I don't
Okay.
know that there's a drop so much as it's like been a steady decline over time. And I think, I think that's also something that I've done a lot of work in previous districts is really looking at the student experience. And so what does it mean to be a student in, whatever city if you're struggling to reach academic standards and the majority of your peers are struggling. So as I said around the curriculum, are we shifting the expectation or is there an overhaul of shifting that needs to happen at a larger systems level to make sure that students are getting what they need? Which is why I took on this role because I'm really passionate about educational policy and really rethinking and reimagining how we're doing education currently and what are some ways we can kind of shift based on the data that we're seeing locally and at the state level.
Okay. And I do want to get to WEC, but I do have a question for you because there is another conversation that is happening. The dumbing down of American
Ooh.
curriculums or American children. And I'm
Mm.
asking because earlier you just talked about, okay, do we continue here in Massachusetts? Do we continue to teach fifth graders as fifth graders, even though they're reading? And it's an example.
Yes.
Even though they're reading at a 2.5 grade level. What is your opinion on this concept that we are dumbing down our American children or the school system?
Ooh, that's a big conversation.
I know it is.
I you know, I, how
Because I
do
mean,
I?
as the statistics that
Yeah.
they are not proficient, right? But like you said, this is a huge conversation where our fifth graders are not reading at a fifth grade level. I remember there was a woman talking about, it was either like in second or third grade, I don't remember, where she was reading Charlotte's Web. I don't remember what she said, but there is this conversation around dumbing down the education system and giving people passing grades or giving them a check plus or a check minus or giving them a participation grade, and then you kick the can down the street.
Yes. So that is a huge conversation in Massachusetts right now.
Okay.
Um, I actually was recently on a friend of mine's podcast. She's from Mississippi, and we talked about all that data coming out of Mississippi now, and like what do we do next? Um, my goodness, this is a so I will
If you
say
can,
this.
if you can, I like I said, I know it's a large conversation, but
Yes.
that is another conversation that is popping up on my feed, and people are like, Americans are stupid, and the kids. So I'm wondering because like you said, if our fifth graders are not reading at a fifth grade level, you're labeling it as dumbing it down, but it has to be addressed. It
There's
has to be addressed.
It has to, yes, I agree. And again, it's a systemic issue, right?
Okay.
It's not to me, um, I will say that this is not me saying this. I have heard that there is an incentive to students and people not performing optimally intellectually because obviously that makes them easier to control. Control for what purpose? I don't know. But this is a theory that I've seen floating around.
I've heard that with the tin hat people and the
Right?
I've heard yes.
So, because if you think about it, it does benefit someone for the overwhelming majority
The
of
masses,
students,
yes.
particularly in the US, which you know what our reputation has been historically. There's an incentive to our kids not being proficient, right? And I think that this is something we haven't talked about yet is family and community engagement. That's part of
Yes.
the work that we do, where it's letting families know this is what's happening. This is the data. If we have to translate it, if we have to bring in experts, consultants, we do what we need to do in order for families to understand the gravity and the urgency of what it means when not just your child is not reading at grade level, but your whole city needs this support. And so how do we come together to make sure that we're holding our elected officials accountable to make sure that students are getting what they need? And that spirals into a larger conversation around policy, where most of the time we don't think about policy, specifically education policy, as a conversation that is for everyone. It's for like people that are in high seats in high places. And what I try to tell folks that I work with at this level is that is exactly the rhetoric that causes decisions to be made without us and our students in mind. We have to get involved, we have to advocate, and we have to know what we're speaking to, and what we're speaking about. I will say briefly that I personally noticed a decline in our practice as educators here, at least in New England, when data became a taboo conversation. Like, what does the data say? How do we know what we're looking at and what the need is if we're not looking at data? And there became a point as educators where the data driven conversation became more work or more laborious, because why? Students are dealing with all kinds of things outside of school that are making it harder for them to access their learning, which is very true. At the same time, when you're constantly just taking a stab in the dark to figure out what to do in the heat of the moment, you never really get down to real, true intervention and addressing the root of the problem. And you never understand how your practice needs to shift overall to get the results you need. It just becomes year in, year out, getting frustrated about the same problem and the same symptoms of the problem, but not getting to the root of it.
Okay. I'm going to leave that there. I think that's a very good answer, but like you said and like I said, that is a whole nother conversation, but
Yes.
I appreciate
Yes.
you for answering that. So,
Yes, of course.
Dr. Herring, let's move to you. I said WEC, you called it WEC.
Work, yes.
Please tell us what it is and what y'all do.
Okay, so Worcester Education Collaborative, or WEC, is an advocacy organization that focuses on working with the Worcester Public Schools as a critical friend to increase outcomes for all students. And we do that through a lens of equity and trauma informed practice. And we also host monthly convenings for our community partners and host 4 annual signature events to help get the word out in the community about the state of education, our data around education in Worcester Public Schools, and how what's happening in Worcester can help inform local and statewide policy.
Okay. And one of the things that I was aware of on the website, it says research suggests that the milestone for literacy is third grade. Why is this and what does that mean?
So, like I think you had mentioned earlier in the conversation, that once a student can access their learning by third grade, then the research shows that their future trajectory is much more positive than if not. And so while we don't only focus on third grade, we definitely, as we're writing our strategic plan and thinking about, WEC moving forward under my leadership, really kind of targeting that third grade sweet spot to think about what are the interventions and the supports that we can implement by that grade level, to then have more positive implications for the future. Actually, last year I had the opportunity with some statewide partners to go to the State House and advocate for the passing of the literacy bill, which is the right to read. And so we're making sure that all students in their earlier time in Worcester Public Schools and across the Commonwealth get access to high quality instructional materials, so that they can start to be successful and go beyond third grade, being able to access their reading, and have better outcomes in the future as well.
Okay. So you talked about earlier how this is a collaborative effort. So I am going to now, excuse me, pull in guardians and or parents.
Yes.
Reading. How important is it that a guardian and or a parent read with their children, especially small children?
Very, very important. I would say start reading to your children in utero.
That's what my mother did.
You know, I mean,
Along with the Bob Marley. It was Bob Marley and reading.
too funny. I mean, it's so important. Like my family, I was reading before I was in kindergarten. My kids were reading by the time they were 3. I mean, literacy, literacy, literacy. And again, once you get into school, formal schooling, that looks very different than what it can look like at home. But you had mentioned how I talked about comprehension as not always embedded in people's definition of literacy. To me, literacy at home can be having a literacy rich conversations. There's a book by a researcher, Richard Rothstein, called Class in Schools. And that was a book that I really I really leaned on in my doctoral studies, really thinking about. He talks about the contrast between students in urban communities versus students in suburban communities, and he contrasts how parents parent their children, and then also the perspective of literacy in each population. Now, obviously, this is an overgeneralization, but this is more so of an observation in his research around how we're rearing students regarding literacy before they enter school and what implications that has for their future. So, something as simple as, for example, he says, when you are, let's say you're a Black family in a low income community, you might say, "What's this, Jen? What's this?" And Jen might say, "Phone." Okay, "What's this? What's this?" "Pen." But in more affluent communities, they're not teaching their children how to identify objects. It's more so keeping the child immersed in literacy rich environments. For example, narrating everything as you go. That when I was when I was younger and I didn't have kids, it used to bug me so much. I'd be in Starbucks and I would hear mom saying, "Okay, we're gonna order a hot chocolate and we're gonna ask for extra whipped cream. Do you like whipped cream?" And I would have to listen to a woman or a dad trying to talk to a toddler who can barely speak. Now I get it. It's about framing the brain and programming the brain to speak in full sentences,
Yes.
right? Like when I was, it's making me think when I was in, oh my gosh, I was in high school and I was fortunate to do a trip to Ghana, West Africa.
Ooh,
It
okay.
was called Ghana Trip for Educators. I went with a woman named Mercy. She owned Mercy's Fashions in Cambridge, a African apparel store. And so it was her, me, a group of my friends, and a group of educators from my church at the time. And one of the women she was a Boston Public Schools principal, she was the woman who led the trip. She says to me, we were in a classroom. It was a group of elementary school kids in Ghana. And every time we asked them questions, they would answer in full sentences. And I didn't even think about it because, when we're kids here, somebody asks you, "How old are you?" 3. "How old are you?" 2. That's just American culture. But in Ghana, it was very much, "I am 3 years old. I am 4 years old." And then it started to click to me. And I wasn't an aspiring educator at that time. But now in retrospect, I'm like, wow, even just being intentional about giving the eye contact and having conversations with your children can create a literacy rich environment in addition to reading to them at night and during the day and, just finding literacy rich activities for them. It's amazing what those little things can do that we think are just personality when really we're just being intentional about creating literacy rich environments so that when they're in school, it's not a shock to their system that they're being asked to say something more than "I'm 2, I'm 4, I'm 5," So
I love that. I absolutely love that. And I love that you were able, excuse me, to go to Ghana. I know that was an amazing
it was
trip.
it was life changing, life changing. And I will say, to your point earlier about just the perception of US schools currently, the level of honor for educators and just the privilege, because school here in the US it's a must, right? I don't know how things have shifted in the education system since I've been there, but when I was there, it was like if you could afford money for a uniform, you were going to school. It was like, I get to go to school today. I'm pressing my
Yes.
uniform. It's
Yes.
just a different, and these were kids that were like my age and younger. When you're in high school in the US, sometimes you can get a little complacent and a little comfortable because you take it for granted until you go somewhere where the schooling experience and an education is not a guarantee. I literally cried the whole time I was there. I was just so moved. It was such a powerful experience.
It was a different life. Different
Yeah,
exposure, different life.
definitely.
Okay. One, and I'm on the, so just, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the goals for WEC is partnering with district leaders to address equity and access for all students and families. And I saw a photo of like this book that was being handed out. And that, I can not necessarily relate to that, but I have a granddaughter and we go to the library, I would probably say at least once a week, and she'll get all of her books. Because we read every day. It's non negotiable for
Yep.
30 minutes. We go to the library, and for whatever reason this time, I decided to get a receipt. And it lists all the books and when they're due. And at the bottom, it actually talked about how much money I saved with all the books that she bought. And it was about $70.
Wow.
Now, for a
Wow.
family, I mean, we had like 10 books, but for a family or for a mother or for a father who is struggling or they are trying to provide other things, spending $70 on books is probably the last thing on their
Yes.
mind. So it
Yes.
seems like one of WEC's goals is to make that gap smaller, to have children have appropriate books in their homes.
Absolutely. I wish I could flip my screen to show you all the books in the hallway outside of my office. There's books on my bookshelf. I have boxes of books right there. Like that is our goal. It's obviously not everything. It's the first step. But to your point, um, we really believe in making it easy for students and families to access learning for their children. And in Worcester and in a lot of our larger cities, we're dealing with a lot of effects from COVID and just the economy and everything that's happening currently. And so anything that we can do to lighten that burden, because given my own circumstance growing up, I never want resources to be a barrier to kids getting books in their hands or like an education. Like this is the United States. And so, if there's anything we can do to provide resources, provide learning opportunities for families, that's where we step in. And just to give you perspective, Worcester is the second largest city in New England, right? So we serve about 25,000 students in Worcester Public Schools. So we are a small organization. We're small but mighty. And so if you think about the conversation we just had, but then you also factor in housing insecurity, food insecurity, economics, employment as compounding things that families are focused on
The
rather
outside
than,
factors that you talked about earlier.
yes. And so we have to figure out strategically, how do we build strategic partnerships to create a web throughout the city of Worcester to make sure all kids get what they need so that they're accessing their learning and making sure that every school, every student, every after school program that we partner with, we are making sure that students feel seen and that they can feel the impact of the work, whether it be the policies that we help implement or advocate for, the resources that we purchase and, provide to our schools or our after school programs. That is the work that we do. So anything that is about access to learning through a lens of equity, we have to make sure that the work that we do spans across the city to the point where all 25,000 students can feel the positive impact that the work that we're doing.
I love that. Is there anything else that you want the community to know about WEC? Is there anything coming up? Are y'all having a
Oh,
meeting? Of course, all the information will be below, but is there
yes.
anything else you want the community to know?
Well, okay, so a couple things. So we have an in-person event coming up in a couple weeks called WOOSA. WOOSA, WOOSAH. It stands for Worcester's Stories of Adversity and Healing. It's our first ever conference that looks to talk about the impact of trauma on learning, and how community partners can come together and really think about a strategic plan to interrupt the impact of learning, the impact of trauma on learning for students in Worcester Public Schools. How do we build the right partnerships? And how do we start getting our educators and our youth development folks to really think about trauma more intentionally, and how we start to help mitigate and create some systems to help prevent further traumatization for our youth. So that's coming up on April 30th. Thursday, April 30th, and it's going to be at Worcester Technical High School. If you're in the area, we'd love to have you. Admission is free. And additionally, we're going to be hosting, beginning this summer, we're going to be hosting a series of virtual learning opportunities to talk some more about trauma, and trauma informed practice, not just in the city of Worcester, but just in general. That is what my research is on. Actually, just published my first book called Sexual, thank you, Sexual Trauma in Educational Settings, where I interview adult women about their experiences in school being survivors of child sexual abuse. And so it's a topic that's really important to me, and something that we're unfortunately seeing more and more as we do more work with the community and think hear the stories of our students and our families. And so we'll have some information posted about how to join those calls and how to stay connected with me and with our team to really talk about how you can partner with us and be part of the solution.
Okay. And I do want to touch on that. I don't want to overlook that. You've
Yeah.
at this point you have, I think you said it 3 or 4 times now. And if just quickly, not quickly, or tell us what you want people to know, and given your childhood experience, how much does trauma affect a child's ability to learn?
Very much. And so thinking about our conversation about literacy, the research shows that the regions in a child's brain that are most impacted by trauma are the language centers. And so it's no wonder that the majority of our students right now are not accessing their learning at grade level when it comes to reading, literacy, and comprehension, because we've all experienced a universal trauma recently, which was the pandemic. And then, of course, everyone has their own personal stories of what's traumatic to them, or family challenges during these times. And so a lot of times, aside from the lack of resources that a lot of our families are challenged by, teachers are not just being confronted with the student themselves, but with things that the student can't even articulate, or even the family can't even articulate. Because going back to what I shared about myself, a lot of the reason why I was so calm and just compliant was because if someone were to take me aside and say, Jennifer, I noticed when you wrote this essay, you didn't like what how can I help you? I'd be like, I don't know, because it's
You can't
trauma
articulate the
impedes
trauma.
your ability to communicate. This is why a lot of even couples, married couples, parent child relationships, the biggest barrier in those relationships is communication, because people have gone through some serious trauma. And if you're not addressing that at the very least with trauma informed education, it's going to continue to be an uphill battle. So that's why I'm so passionate about it, is because I see the connection between development of children, psychology, neuroscience, our own interpersonal interactions with each other, and then how that comes out in a student's ability to access their learning.
This kind of puts me in the conversation. This kind of puts me in the mind frame of the conversation about hunger and learning as well.
Yes,
We've been
yes,
hearing for, I know I have for years now, how much a child being hungry, their focus, their attention span,
yes.
they're supposed to be writing an essay, but they're hungry. It sounds like to me trauma is has the same effects on a child when it comes to education.
Absolutely, which is why, sometimes what is challenging for me um, is communicating the for lack of a better word, the special sauce. Like, what's Weck's special sauce? we don't really have a special sauce. What we have is an organization that's committed to making sure that students get what they need, with the understanding that we are constantly having to pivot in the background based on what families are dealing with in the community. So, for example, last fall we had that policy or that shift that where people thought that they were going to end up losing their SNAP benefits. We still were about the work that we're about. And I was on calls with hundreds of leaders in the city of Worcester to figure out, okay, how are we going to get people food, gift cards, who's distributing, who's supporting? Should I go to the schools? Which schools are having experiencing the highest level of poverty? Do I need to go sit at those schools and take names and figure out that's how we function. And so when when people are like, "Oh, Jen, you look exhausted," I'm like, that's that's why, because I hold, kind of two identities, for lack of a better word, where I'm doing the work that we do on paper and on our website and on social media. And then I have this other stuff that I don't really talk about because it's like, it's not really the work. It's the stuff that helps us do the work. And that's just as important as the stated work itself.
Okay, I absolutely love that. And I know you
Yeah.
are doing great work. The
Thank you.
last thing, it's something simple, but I'm pretty sure it makes a huge difference when it comes to whether the family is financially stable or maybe they are not. When it comes to the child being at home, when it comes to a parent or a guardian, what simple steps can they take to help with literacy? It might be small, but in the end, it could be monumental, or it could be pivotal in them learning to read and or comprehend. What can we do? Simple steps.
I would say get books in the hands of kids about content that they're interested in.
Ah,
That's all it takes. All it takes. I had a student when I was a vice principal, constantly roaming the halls, really struggled with staying on task. And I went on my phone. I said, I just rush ordered a book about basketball. It's coming to my house tomorrow. If I give this to you, will you stay in class? And he was glued to that book. Could barely read, unfortunately. But
wow.
just having a book that had content that they were interested in made
Interest.
the
Okay.
difference, right?
Interest.
And I would say, to balance, because I always want to be balanced, to balance that with our conversation about access to tech, if you blend interesting and engaging grade level books with maybe like a Kindle or some kind of device where a student can kind of practice navigating using a device, but still fostering literacy, I think those two things will go a long way.
Okay. So what I'm hearing you say is interest.
Yes,
It has
yes,
interest. And
absolutely.
he may have struggled, but because he was interested, I'm not going to say struggled through, but what's the word I'm looking for? He powered through. He figured it out.
Absolutely. Yes, yes.
Okay. And would you tag on with that? Would you say, starting out when your child is learning how to read, or when you're teaching them, asking them questions about what they're reading, or stopping at words that they do not know or are not familiar with?
Yes, absolutely. One thing that I didn't mention about our family and community engagement is that we host parent workshops where we model for parents what it looks like to read, not just read to the child, but asking recall and comprehension questions about the text and about the content to help reinforce for parents. Is very simple. If you do this even once a week, you'll see different results. If you do this every night of the week, you'll see results. And so really just those simple things of literacy, comprehension, recall, and then my personal favorite is academic discourse. Because if a child can talk about what they read using the vocabulary of the text that they read, and agree and disagree and have discourse with their peers, that goes a lot. They're ready for higher ed at that point.
Use it in a sentence is what I'm hearing. Use it in a sentence, or use it
Absolutely.
in conversation.
Use it in conversation, use it in a sentence, and then debate someone who has an opposing opinion from you, but just using language and content from the text.
Okay. I absolutely love it, Dr. Herring. We are coming to the end of our conversation. I've had an amazing time speaking to you. You have
Thank
given
you.
a wealth of
Likewise.
information. Please let people know personally and or business wise, or your position at WEC. Please let people know where they can support and follow you and where to find you.
Absolutely. So we can be found on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. We also have our website, We Collaborative, WE Collaborative, all one word, .org.
Okay. And if there is nothing else, Dr. Herring, I am going to say afternoon to you, and I will see everybody else later.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.